Hello guys, I hope everyone is doing well. This is Meg at Chasing Retro, and I have a little tutorial of sorts for you today. I'm going to show how I make fabric covered journals. I love to make them out of muffin boxes, and I had some cotton batting that you saw there. I got that at Walmart. The first thing that I do is I lay the box down after cutting all of the extra tabs off of it. I lay it down on the batting and just cut around. I'm not being very careful about the edges yet. I just want to get it glued down. And I typically use a glue stick and a Fabri-Tac for this part, just because I don't want to use all Fabri-Tac, just because the smell and the expense of it. I use the Fabri-Tac mainly around the edges and just a little bit in the center. But we're going to sew this to hold it down later, so you're not gluing it as its only means of support. And then I just laid the box down, print side down onto the batting, and make sure that it is extremely well adhered. And then I trim off the excess. You don't have to be exact about this as well, because when you sew it, it will shift a little bit on you. So just do the best you can, and then we're going to take this to the sewing machine next. I'm just going to do a straight stitch around the outside, and you can see here. And then I go back and I trim the excess again that is just peeking out of the edge. Now I have my fabric, and I cut a piece that is about a ½ inch to an inch as a border on all four sides. Again, I don't measure. Sometimes I do end up ripping it, but today I just decided to use the scissors. Before I glue it down, before I sew it down, I do take it over to the ironing board. So I did that. I'm going to do that in a second, and then I'll bring it back nicely ironed. Before I do that though, I cut the four corners off. I leave about a third of an inch or so between the edge of the fabric and the corner of the box, and that just helps you fold it. So here I'm using the Fabri-Tac, and I am going to do the long edges first, and I just glue them down, making sure I pull the fabric taut along the edge of the box. I rotate it because I'm right-handed, and it's easier for me to do it that way. And then here, there's no easy way to explain this, but on the next part, I put Fabri-Tac inside the little triangle that's formed, as well as on top of the edge of the other piece. And that sort of lets me create that gift wrap corner, if you will. And it's not going to be perfect, don't worry about that. When you sew it again in a second, it will hold everything down just fine. If you still want that perfect edge and you don't like how it's peeking out underneath your paper, you can always glue book corners on these as well. Now I'm just folding it to make sure the fabric is not too tight. I'm going to measure here to see how wide I need to cut the cardstock. I like to use very thick, heavy-duty cardstock for the inside. I guess these would be called end papers. And be sure on this part, my fabric is not one directional, but be sure, I've done this before, don't glue the inside end papers upside down. I have seriously done that before, and it's not really fixable. So I'm cutting both sides. With the Krusteaz muffin boxes, they end up being right at about 5½ inches, maybe a little less. And it's just a trial and error kind of thing. The box is not going to be 100% square. If that bothers you, you just kind of have to let it go. These are meant to be a little bit more flexible. And so these are going to have a closure that is sewn in. I really like to do those with these journals. And I'm cutting off 2 pieces of sari silk. This is imperative that you remember to do this before you sew around the outside edge. You will glue these onto the box, but you will also sew them, and that ensures that they won't be pulled out easily when you're tying the journal closed. I'm using Fabri-Tac for this part, and I'm just sort of eyeballing it and I'm probably inlaying the sari silk about 2 inches into the book. You don't want to put it on the very edge because, again, you want it to be able to hold when someone is tying the book. And then I'm going on the other side and doing the same thing. I'm going to close the book to make sure they do line up, and they do. And I'm trying to make the sari silk as flat as I can, just so you won't see a ripple underneath the cardstock. Now it's time to glue the cardstock down. Sometimes I put glue in the back of the cardstock. Sometimes I do it this way. It really just depends on the day. I thought this paper was really cute. It reminds me of wallpaper with framed art hanging on it. And these journals that I'm working on are just a series of floral journals that are going to be faith or scripture journals, and so they're all going to be a little different. So now I am sewing all around the outside edge. I'm using a straight stitch. The width is a 3. Make sure when you do this, you pull those closures out of the way. You don't want to sew them down sew them in another part to the book. And I'm just going all the way around. I don't feel like I'm experienced enough to sew on the top, but it looks just fine. You'll see in a minute when I flip it over, the stitching looks just fine, even though that's technically the underneath. So now we're putting another piece of cardstock in the spine, and this doesn't have to be decorative. I'm using file folder here. This is just to give the spine a little bit more rigidity so that when you sew in your signatures, they will be able to, hold better. They're not going to be risking tearing through just a single layer of the chipboard. I had trouble with this piece. Evidently the first piece I cut was not lined up correctly, and it was larger at the top and slimmer at the bottom, so I had to restart over. And I'm just going to glue this down with Fabri-Tac as well. You don't want to glue the cardstock over the folds. You can see the natural folds of the box. Those are your hinges, so you want to be sure to keep those clear, and we'll cover those in a moment. So to cover the little hinges, you have several options. Here I'm using seam binding. You can also cut or tear a large wide piece of fabric and extend it over the whole area, extending it and gluing it down to the end pages. The third option you can do is to put some lace here. A beautifully edged lace looks lovely coming onto the end papers. But here I just chose to do the seam binding just because it's very easy to close on the hinge. But I wanted to bring some of that beautiful black fabric inside to the book, so I went ahead and tore another piece, and I'm just going to glue that on top. And again, I'm being sure that I stay away from those hinges because you don't want a strange fold in the fabric. And it is ready, guys. It is ready to start filling with all of your favorite pages. I hope all of you enjoyed this little tutorial. This is just the way I make them, and have a great day.